boss's boss, threatens to fire me. I accept and get himself and his friends fired. Background. In January 2021, I began working for a very big American company in Europe that was and is in the energy sector. At the factory plant where I began working, the parts of gas turbines get assessed for restoration and reworked so they can be used again. Each single part would cost several thousand when produced new and hold for like a decade or so. Reworking cost about 1/4 of that, and the part would be good for another 8 to 10 years, with more inspections for safety. The customers would pay like half or 3/4 of the cost of a new part, and since we talk 2.8K per single part and a gas turbine containing thousands of pieces, we're speaking several million for each turbine. The customer would save a good chunk, and the company was sitting on a golden goose. Over the decades, that meant the facility where the stuff was reworked had an absolutely uncontested income with little competition, since the parts were their own design and production. A win-win for customer and company. Over time, that led to the problem that competence, innovation, or even honesty were not needed by the management of the facility anymore. As long as the workers stuck to the already developed and tested processes and did their job, money would keep flowing in regardless of what the office did or didn't do. You can see where this is going. Setup. So I was hired as part of quality control, specifically to operate a 3D computer-managed measuring machine. Gas turbines get, as you can imagine, pretty hot and spin fast. A decade of heat combined with dynamic stress has the nasty habit of deforming stuff. You can't have that, so you have to measure the parts precisely to ensure the production team knows what section of which piece needs reworking, or if a piece is too deformed to be used again at all. Operating such a machine is not too complicated. Put the piece into a bracket, clamp it down, load the correct model, and start the program. You get a measurement report as a text file, an Excel, and a PDF. The pieces, usually rotary blades, nearly always came in sets, 24x16, depending on size. When all are measured, you compile the reports the machine made into one Excel using a complicated method. Wasn't hard. I learned it all in a week. That machine was immensely important for the facility, running in 2 to 3 shifts per day, 6 days per week. Like 80% of all pieces that went through the reworking process had to be measured at least twice. As nearly anyone with a technical background can guess, operating a machine and understanding what it is actually doing are two big different shoes. When I started, there were only 3 guys who understood the machine properly, as well as a technician, Vladimir, who could actually fix codes or reprogram a 3D model if there was a problem. Vladimir, however, was the technician for the entire facility, very busy guy, and when he had to come over, his time would need to be paid by the department, something the bosses didn't encourage, so to say. Of the 3 guys who knew the machine, Antonio is important. He had been working there for a few centuries at least. He knew every nuance and, while being a simple worker, if shot went wrong, he was the guy you turned to. He had a short temper and a blunt language, but he was honest, open, and very fair. I myself am not the most social person, always held back with brutal honesty, and I take my professional cold attitude a bit too seriously, I guess. In general, if people share my principles of honesty, fairness, and responsibility, we get along greatly. But with people who are less trustworthy, I basically turn into an ice block. Not perfect, I know, but hey, I don't work in retail for a good reason. So despite some heated arguments, Antonio and I got along swimmingly. What no one knew was that Antonio had, over the decades, collected a backlog of days off, overtime and whatnot, allowing him to retire 2 years early, and he was 63. He decided to groom me as his successor and began teaching me every little detail about the measuring machine, how to fix stuff, do proper maintenance, and why it did certain things. He was a perfectionist, but so am I, so I really appreciated it. What I noticed in my first week was the biggest problem there. The facility had a massive problem with cliques, clans, and little circles. If you were part of the correct clique, you could do whatever you wanted and remain untouchable. If you weren't, well, your credit went to anyone but you, and you became a fine scapegoat. I didn't care much about it, to be honest. I'm a bit of a rule fanatic and stick to them even when everyone else ignores them. For me, this was a well-paying job with a horrible commute, 3-4 hours one way, so I wanted to stay there for as long as I could, earn my money, and then just take the next job. There was a 4th guy operating the machine. I don't remember his name, so let's call him Igor. Igor was part of the same clique as my boss, Manuel, my boss's boss, Freddy, and of course his own boss, Boris, who was also his brother. Igor was working the measuring machine simply because it was the most comfortable job he could perform. He was usually on the night shift, as those paid extra. Occasionally he took the late shift, while I always took the early one, least popular due to starting at 6 a.m., but I liked going home at 3 p.m. Igor was, well, as dim as a dead bulb. He was like a wet match in a dark basement somewhere in a black hole. I might be a bit harsh, but that's all I ever saw from him. He was also pretty lazy, rude and arrogant. After all, he had an untouchable status due to his brother's best friend being the boss of the entire assessment department. Actual story. A good 6 months after I started, there was the first incident with the measuring machine. We received the material on pallets, and it was the firm rule that the rotary blades had to be sorted in numerical order. Each had a serial number and a set number. Stuff went a ton faster and easier if all was sorted cleanly 182, or whatever the set went up to. Occasionally, an order, usually 2 to 4 pallets, would arrive unsorted at the measuring machine. Then we had to sort them. Since we had to lift the blades out one by one anyway to measure them, it wasn't that big of a deal, just a tad bit annoying. Igor never finished a set if he could help it, leaving just 1 or 2 blades left for measuring. Even when he had to finish a set and start a new one, he would never compile the reports into one Excel. I'm pretty sure he didn't even know how that worked. One morning, I came to work, and like so often, there were just 3 blades left to measure. I shrugged without care and wanted to just finish the order and start the next. Problem was, the pallets were a complete mess. Completely unsorted, despite them being measured. Igor had worked the late shift the day before, and would also work the late shift that day, so I would actually get to see him for a few minutes when I handed my shift over. This, of course, meant that I would have to sort all the pallets, while also operating the machine with the next order to avoid a delay. The machine was a bit of a bottleneck in the facility. Usually, this is a chill post. The blades are never heavier than 22 kilograms, 48 pounds, and you had like 6 to 14 minutes between the measurement cycles to lift them out and exchange them with the last measured blade. Sorting the last order took me 2 hours of quite sweaty work while also operating the machine nearby, so I was somewhat annoyed. When Igor came in that afternoon, I asked him in a polite manner why he had not sorted that one order. He replied in quite a rude tone that he wouldn't do that. I was a bit baffled and asked if he didn't know that it was mandatory to do that. He simply replied, in a pretty rude tone again, that he wouldn't speak about it, outright refusing to speak about a problem. What the hell? I told him that if he didn't want to speak about it, I would have to speak with my boss. He just smiled in a smug fashion and told me to do that. Well, I did just that. I asked my boss about it in the fashion of, "Hey, I thought we were supposed to sort that stuff, or did we change that?" This led to a 4-way talk with my boss, Igor, as well as Boris. Boris was not happy at all, and my boss was rather embarrassed because it was all clear that I was correct, but neither of them wanted to admit that their friend had done anything wrong. I did my usual ice block impression, showing a blank face, replying in very accurate and short words, and staying all polite and professional. It came out rather inconclusive with a kind request that we should please sort the pallets if they came in as a mess. Igor just shrugged, and it was clear that he didn't care. It happened 3 more times that stuff came in unsorted, but Igor managed to avoid doing it ever. Okay. Update 1. 6 weeks later, there was the second incident. Every morning before I started, I would maintain the machine like Antonio had showed me to do, cleaning everything and rubbing special liquid into the stone tread the machine's arch ran back and forth on. One morning I came in and turned the machine into manual mode like every morning, so that I could run the arch to the end of the thread for maintenance. A second thereafter, I heard a grinding noise and instantly stopped the machine. The arch was an AIR cushion-based runner, kind of like a hovercraft where the bottom of the arch would always remain a tiny bit above the surface to ensure minimum vibration. So a grinding sound is really, really bad. I quickly inspected the thread and found quite the deep crater in the stone surface, maybe 2-3 cm deep, 1 inch, and wide, enough for the air cushion to lose pressure, so the arch was sliding over the stone surface of the thread. This inspection also revealed scratches along nearly the entire length of the thread, so it was pretty clear that the machine had been running with this crater for a good bit. I immediately shut down the machine, informed Vladimir as well as my boss that some big shut was going on here. I also took pictures of the damage with timestamps, just out of my usual paranoia. The machine was put out of commission. As the arch had taken damage, the entire stone thread had to be reworked, and the machine needed recalibration. It was out for over a month due to that crater. That crater, by the way, looked exactly like the bottom corner of one of the blades, as if one had been dropped onto the stone thread, and the previous shift before me had drumrolls Igor. Of course, he denied that he had done anything wrong, and he could also not recall seeing any scratches or hearing any grinding noise during his shift. He tried to blame it on me, but I had reported the stuff 5 minutes into my shift, with the last blade Igor had measured still in the machine. Again, it was clear to all who had fucked up, but again, not even a harsh word to him. While the machine was getting fixed and reworked, we were put to different work. I got into the pre-assessment team, where the pieces get their first evaluation. I made good friends there, which would serve as my ears later on. Update 2. After the machine got fixed a good month later, we had collected a massive backlog, to the point that the other departments who did the repair were struggling to find something to do that didn't need measurements. The machine was supposed to work in 3 shifts, but Antonio had left for his 2-year vacation when the machine had been put out for repairs, and the other 2 colleagues who knew how to run and maintain the machine had left for better jobs, so it was only me and Igor by then, with me working quite some overtime for good pay. All bullshit aside, the hourly wage was really proper. One morning, I noticed something pretty weird. The order I'd just started the previous afternoon was still not finished, again with just 2 blades remaining. Every measurement report has a timestamp, which I quickly had a look into. The measurement cycle for these was like 3 minutes plus 1 minute exchanging 1 blade for the next. For some reason, the measurement reports from Igor's shift had 10-15-minute gaps in between, some even half an hour. Igor was still around, as he had the night shift. I knew he was a bit of a slacker, but these gaps were quite big, so I first thought there had been trouble with the machine. I asked him if he had any trouble with the machine last night, and he snapped at me that all had been fine. I asked if he was sure, and he in return inquired why I asked. I told him that there were quite some heavy gaps in between the measurement report, and that I couldn't find any error messages of sudden stops or such. Igor looked at those timestamps for a moment, back at me, and just shrugged before he went home. That would have been the end of it if it wouldn't have been even stranger the next shift, Monday. I had, for once, not worked on Saturday, so Igor had 3 shifts in since I had last clocked out. I came in as usual, did the maintenance and cleaning, and wanted to check how far he had gotten. 4 orders had gone through since my last shift, so I assumed that, as usual, I would have to compile the reports. But there were none. I was pretty confused, searching the orders' numbers, checking the machine protocol, and all. The measuring machine had been running over the weekend with no shutdown or restart visible in the log, but also no measurement reports at all. I called in Vladimir as well. 4 orders worth of reports missing is a big deal. According to rules, I also informed my boss that the machine was standstill due to technical issues. Both Vladimir and my boss came into the measuring room, and we 3 searched for the problem. It took us a while to figure it out, simply due to it being absolutely not expected. Someone had turned off the output of the machine, maybe to avoid the timestamps. This again caused quite some ruckus, as all 4 orders had to be measured again with reports, and production was really struggling now to have something to work on. Again, all clear who had fucked up, and finally, Freddy had enough, but not of Igor. Malicious compliance. The afternoon of the same day, Freddy, the boss of the entire assessment department, came into my measuring room, dressed in a nice, expensive suit with a tie and polished shoes. He marched straight toward me, standing right in front of my chair as I was compiling the results of the remeasured first order. He stood so close that he didn't even give me the space to stand up properly. He looked down at me, snapped in an angry tone, and said he was sick and tired of me bullying my coworkers. Then, with a dramatic flourish, he handed me a letter, the signed termination paper of my contract, signed by him, of course. He informed me I had exactly 2 options: promise to do better, apologize to my coworker Igor, and admit that I was at fault. Be fired immediately. Well, the good thing about being bullied and terrorized for most of your childhood is that you learn to keep a cool head under stress. I reined in my first urge to argue or tell him that such actions were illegal. Instead, I took the letter and carefully read through it before nodding a few times. Due to my cold, professional attitude, I was known for often remaining silent, so he took my nods as compliance. He informed me he expected my written apology before 2 p.m. All of the bosses went home by 2 p.m. and came in around 8 or 9 a.m. Typical. When he turned around and marched out with a smug grin, he left me holding the termination letter, complete with his signature on it. Fun fact, when both parties agree, a contract can be canceled immediately without any further responsibilities beyond paying for hours already worked. Payments go directly through human resources, based on the electronic timestamps of our clock-ins and clock-outs. I had 2 hours until his deadline. Here's what I did. Carefully cleaned my workplace, ensuring everything was neat and tidy. Made a backup of my work laptop, as per the rules. And then, also according to the rules, completely wiped the hard drive. The backup was saved to the assigned server with all data correctly named and compiled. However, the server for backups is marked as unsearchable to avoid cluttering the search lists. If you knew the rules and where to look, you could find everything within 20 seconds. If not, good luck searching through 10 TB of data. Made a copy of the termination paper, now signed by me too, and sent it to my email which was allowed. I put the original back into the envelope. Then I packed my things, including the work laptop, work phone, and any other company equipment I had. With the envelope in hand, I went up to the office. Freddie's smug smile greeted me the moment he saw me, but confusion quickly replaced it when he noticed I was carrying all my work equipment. I handed him the envelope, offered a polite nod, and turned to leave. He shouted, asking where the hell I was going, still holding the envelope in his hand. "You terminated my contract. According to the rules, I am to hand over all personal equipment issued by the company before leaving. Exceptions, according to paragraph B, include safety shoes and safety glasses. I bid you a fine day, Mr. Freddy." I said this with a cold, calculated voice, deliberately trying to sound like a lawyer because I knew he hated my professional attitude. Then I went to my direct boss, piled all my stuff on his desk, and informed him of the termination. My boss's eyes went wide. He immediately realized I was the only person left who actually knew how to maintain and operate the measuring machine properly. He also understood the massive backlog already causing issues for other departments. Without measurements, these departments had begun enforcing short-time work. He was lost for words and rushed into Freddy's office with the termination letter. Meanwhile, I went to the locker room, changed into my regular clothes, and then headed to the gate. There, I asked security to fully inspect my person and my backpack. This is standard procedure for personnel terminated on short notice, and while the guards were pretty baffled that I requested it myself, they complied. After a full inspection, they handed me a written confirmation, stating that I had nothing on me belonging to the company. On my way home, my now ex-boss called repeatedly. I dislike having phone calls in public transport, so I simply muted the phone and continued reading my book until I got home. At 4 p.m., well past his usual time to leave work, I finally answered one of his calls. He tried to convince me that I needed this job and that everything could be sorted out. My reply: "I will have a new job within a week. You will need at least a month to train someone new on the machine, if you had anyone who could train a new person. Tell you what, give me a solid contract with triple the pay, a written apology from Freddy, and guaranteed peace while working, and I'll consider coming back." He told me I was being completely unreasonable with such demands. My response: "So let me get this straight. 3 times I discover massive bullshit happening. 3 times you try to heap the blame on me. Then Freddy actually fires me, and now you want me to be reasonable? Well, I'll tell you what's reasonable. Ignoring you. Please be well." I hung up and blocked his number, along with any other numbers he might use to contact me. Update 3. As I mentioned before, I still had ears in the company, so I know what happened afterward. The facility's most sensitive bottleneck became tighter than ever, and soon it was clogged solid. Without proper maintenance, the measuring machine began breaking down regularly. Being a precision machine, it didn't tolerate neglect. Vladimir was soon called in multiple times a day to fix problems, which caused backlogs for him in other areas. Things I, or Antonio before me, would fix within a minute now took hours, just for Vladimir to find time to come over. Other departments ran completely dry of work, and nobody wanted to take the blame for missed deadlines. The issue climbed the ladder, eventually landing on the desk of the national CEO of the company. I found this out through a friend in HR. What followed was the arrival of the proverbial kill squad, a group of guys in tight suits with cold eyes, no sense of humor, and strict orders to find heads to put on a plate. From what I heard, even a prosecutor from the USA was involved. A month later, the company called me for an interview. Not a job interview, but they wanted my statement about the whole affair. This wasn't a legal matter, so they couldn't force me, but I happily complied. I gave a full, honest account, admitted what I didn't know, and signed a statement confirming I had told the truth. The aftermath: Igor was fired for careless negligence. His brother, Boris, was also immediately booted out. My direct boss and Boris were fired for mismanagement. Freddy, not only was he fired, but he was also dragged into court. I have no idea what happened to him afterward, but given how ruthless the company's lawyers are, I wouldn't be surprised if he faced serious consequences. The entire facility went deep into the red that year, as nearly all contracted reworks missed deadlines, leading to daily fines of tens of thousands per contract. Many of my old colleagues sought new jobs, even those who had been there for 20 years. The company eventually had to contract the machine's producer to train new employees, paying them salaries akin to triple the zeros at the end. As for me, I found a new job within 1 day. I was fired on a Monday, had an interview on Tuesday, and a test work day on Thursday. By the end of that day, they asked when I could start. My answer: next Monday. I now do manual measurements in an incoming quality control department. My boss is a blast, the team is friendly, and my commute is only 18 minutes with an electric scooter. I've been there for 9 months, and I'm already the de facto team leader for first sample work. Best of all, I'm appreciated for what I do. Hope you enjoyed this long story.